What kind of mother would give her young daughter away to a cult leader and call it love? As Serena Kelley watched her mother preach about sacrifice, faith, and loyalty to God, she suddenly paused, pointed to the crowd, and the room fell silent. Every eye turned to Serena, the sacrifice. She was just 12, married since the age of 3. For the first time, she knew that she had to escape, but she had no idea how hard it would be. The Children of God was one of the world's biggest cults. What started with California dropouts and East Coast addicts exploded into a global empire of communes. But Serena Kelley never joined the cult. She was born into it. As a daughter of the inner circle, she had seen and heard more than most. She lived in luxurious houses while other members lived in filth, but that didn't mean she enjoyed it. In the late 1960s, her mother Sarah had been a drug-addicted hippie swept up in the counterculture. One night, she narrowly escaped a police bust after striking up a conversation with a man named Alfred, Serena's future father and one of the earliest members of the cult. Years later, David Berg, the group's leader, would tell her it wasn't chance, it was divine intervention. God had saved her, and now she had a mission to spread the word. Berg himself came from a different world. He was the son of Virginia Brandt Berg, one of America's first radio evangelists. In the 1930s, she captivated listeners nationwide with the story of how her faith had cured a crippling illness that left her bedridden for 7 years. Virginia crisscrossed the country as living proof of divine healing. Behind the wheel, her son David watched firsthand as ordinary people were transformed by belief. By the late 60s, America was in the throes of a countercultural revolution. Hippies preached peace, drugs, and free love. David, now a husband and father of 4, preached God on the beaches and sidewalks of California. He stood on the brink of becoming a key figure in the Jesus Revolution, a movement that sought to rescue young souls from drugs and deliver them into the arms of God. But the movement didn't abandon all of the hippie ideals. They kept the free love part. David claimed that God spoke to him one night, commanding him to save the misguided masses. He spent the next few years preaching in drug dens, cleansing what he called the gutters of America, and forming Teens for Christ, the precursor to the Children of God. David urged young people to abandon what he called the system, the capitalist world of men in suits, white picket fences, and sexual conservatism. He said that it was all the work of the Antichrist. Like the hippies, he preached free love, but love and sex, he insisted, were to be enjoyed in the service of Jesus Christ. David claimed the end of the world was nigh, but if you truly believed you would be saved from eternal damnation, follow him and everything would be shared: food, housing, even bodies. To some, this sounded like a good deal, and the early followers, like Serena's mom and dad, were granted a special place in the hierarchy. He soon amassed enough followers to take a caravan of Jesus freaks on the road, a mass of long-haired youngsters wielding Bibles who belonged to what a newspaper reporter called Moses and the Children of God, or COG. The newspaper said that they were drug-free, an anti-establishment force against the man, and as Newsweek wrote, they were, quote, doing something that money just couldn't buy. By 1969, the group had grown to about 200 members, all living on a former ranch owned by a man David had once worked for. In one of his many letters, David wrote, "God has given us a plan whereby we are going to set up, by the grace of God, bases, strongholds, fortresses of God, colonies, whole communities." The movement expanded quickly. Within 2 years, 800 more people had joined the new colony near Skid Row in California. By the end of 1971, there were 69 colonies across the United States and 4,000 members, surviving on cash donations and gifts of food and clothing. But the good days didn't last. American teenagers would tell their parents they were going on the road in service of Christ, but it turned out to be Christ and sex. This led to the formation of Free COG, Free Our Sons and Daughters from the Children of God. David's response was to set up in Europe, forming communes in England, Germany, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia. David warned that America had become an enemy of God, so he ordered his followers to migrate and spread the good word all over the world. They were unstoppable. By the mid-70s, they had colonies in 70 countries with over 10,000 full-time members. COG missionaries looked and talked cool. What's more, the most attractive of them used free sex as a lure. David called it flirty fishing, when beautiful young women and handsome boys approached people on the streets and sold them what was essentially sex and salvation. He was basically pimping them out to enlarge his following. In 1978, rumors had been circulating that older members of what was now widely regarded as a cult had been exploiting younger members. In response, David dissolved the organization and dismissed its leadership. Many hundreds, disillusioned and disgusted, left on their own. But David had other plans just as perverse as those that had come before. In 1983, Sarah, who was now firmly established in the inner circle, fell pregnant with Serena. Serena, like other kids born to the original members, was to be treated as a special case. They were to serve as an example of how children were to be brought up. Serena grew up living in houses that were beautifully decorated with swimming pools and fountains in the garden. Meanwhile, parts of the commune were walled off and families lived in dilapidated huts. They were constantly reminded of their duty to Jesus, who was apparently speaking through David. Some of Serena's earliest memories are of being in the swimming pool as adults practiced free love and they danced around naked. David said that it was wrong to feel shame. Shame was the work of Satan. He liked dancing, so he had adults video themselves and send him the tapes for his later enjoyment. He had them dress up and act out his fantasies. Everyone had to perform. When Serena was just 3 years old, she was given to David in a private ceremony. The union remained a secret to everyone but a chosen few. They used an adult's ring, a heart-shaped ring which David wrapped with tape so it would fit on her finger. She hated it. She hated everything and never felt safe. But her mind was still too young to fully comprehend what was going on around her. She might have been special, but like all the children of the cult, she had to do the work to keep the colonies functioning. That meant that she had to beg, going out in groups of small kids with their hands out, asking for money in the name of Jesus. She spent many years begging on the dangerous streets of Manila and Rio de Janeiro. She barely ever saw her father, who was always away on errands for David. She saw her mom more often, but her mom just told her to wipe the tears from her eyes. The cult promoted corporal punishment for unruly kids they called bad apples. If Serena complained about begging or said that she didn't want to dance with strange men, Sarah would often throw her to the floor and beat the devil out of her. She was an extremely violent woman, Serena would say many years later when she finally told her story to the world. But all the kids had been brainwashed. They hadn't experienced the world outside of the cult, so the beatings, the dancing, all the lurid activities that they saw going on around them, it was all they knew. They'd been told the world was an evil place and that regular folks had demons inside of them, but in the commune, they would be spared from the end of the world and one day be delivered into God's hands in heaven. But when her mother looked her in the eye and told the entire crowd that she would sacrifice her if God demanded, Serena knew she had to get out. Her mother was preparing her for one of the older men in the cult, men who made Serena's skin crawl. Polygamy was the norm, everything was shared, God demanded it, and sooner or later Serena would be expected to bear children for the cult. At around the time Serena had been born, the cult had another name change, this time to The Family. There'd been a lot of negative press, so much that David's philosophy of life, his tenets on perverted sex, had to be censored and rewritten. But he kept the part about where he said he experienced free love for the first time with his German nanny. He was obsessed with sex, and his obsessions formed a major part of his belief structure, and that included an anything-goes strategy for child rearing. His beliefs were stated in the thousands of letters that he wrote, such as the one titled "The Devil Hates Sex, but God Loves It," penned in 1980. He said, "There's nothing in the world at all wrong with sex as long as it's practiced in love. Whatever it is or whoever it's with, no matter who, at what age, or what relative, or what manner. The system, or the society most people belonged to, hated sex, and by extension, the devil hated sex and God loved it. It was his way of making his perversions permissible. For David, if you wanted to prove your love to someone, you had sex with them, and any criticism of his tenets on sex was the work of the Antichrist. So he left his first wife, Jane, the so-called grandmother, and then started a relationship with his personal secretary, Karen Zerby. God, said David, had told him that Jane represented the old church and Karen the new church. It obviously had nothing to do with the fact that Karen was 22 years younger and better looking. Karen would eventually take over when David's health began to fail in the mid-90s. She told her brethren around the world that she pre-existed modern society and had been a great lover of Jesus Christ in heaven. Before she came down to earth, she said Christ had told her, "You are Maria of the end, the prophetess, the unlocker of the mysteries of heaven." Since she and David before her had lived in luxurious compounds far away from the regular members, she and David appeared only in letters and cartoons. Like David, Karen embraced a disturbing approach to childcare, one rooted in David's so-called sexual enlightenment with his nanny. So when Karen gave birth to a child at a colony in Spain in 1975, he was raised to be the prime example of the cult's twisted philosophy. The child, Ricky Rodriguez, became known within the group as Davidito. Karen told the members all around the world that one day Davidito would be able to call down fire from heaven and devour their enemies. She said with the right upbringing, he would guide them all when the end times came. This upbringing was all outlined and even photographed in a 762-page book called the Davidito Book, which was sent out to 2,700 family homes all over the world as an example of how to bring up kids. This included the so-called nannies, the expectation that he would watch adult rituals, and then one day he would have teen training with older members of the group. In fact, many boys and girls would experience this training. Ricky's sister Christina certainly would. These kids were an example for everyone, which is partly why Serena's upbringing was so disturbing. But Ricky would grow up and understand what had happened to him. His image was all over that book, a grim and humiliating reminder of his pain. So when he got out of the cult, he wanted revenge. And one day he would get it. As Serena grew older, she began to rebel. She shaved her hair short, doing everything she could to appear unwomanly. She knew that once she had turned 13, she would be given to a man. It was a common practice in the cult, as it had been with Mary Berg, David's own granddaughter. She was another that later came forward, telling the world how David was always drinking, always angry and violent behind closed doors. He would beat her senseless for not conforming, which he said was the work of the devil. Kids like her and later Serena ran the risk of being sent to a punishment camp, such as the Family Detention Center in Macau. It was there that Mary was locked in a room for 6 months. After refusing to go along with the depravity at the cult, she was subjected to 5 violent exorcisms. Not surprisingly, she had a nervous breakdown and believed that she was possessed by the devil. Her punishment was used as a learning resource for other members. David documented the incident in a publication he titled The Last State: The Dangers of Demonism. This was required reading for all members, explaining how David ordered the devil out of Mary, then just 14, and slapped her in the face and beat her with a rod. As she stood in front of him, her small hands trembling, her mind full of demons and hell, he finished, "I love you, sweetheart. Good night." She eventually got back to the US, but was severely traumatized. Many years later in 2005, Rolling Stone wrote about her saying, "Mary is addicted to methamphetamine, turning tricks on Southern California beaches and struggling to stay alive." If the stories of Ricky and Mary, who were both older than Serena, were a blueprint for life outside of the commune, then Serena was going to struggle. She realized the only way to survive was to get as far away as possible from her mother, so she played the part of a good disciple and told the higher-ups that she wanted to spread the word in Mexico. It was a wish that Sarah granted, hoping Mexico would encourage Serena to be less rebellious. But when she turned 17, she was as rebellious as ever and still refusing to marry. That's why she was sent to the US as a punishment, to what she referred to as a halfway house for cult members. There, she was to take care of 3 children of a male member who'd been divorced by one of the inner circle. Sarah threatened that if she messed up, she would never be able to be allowed back into the world services, the highest rank in all of the cult. Serena had no intention of ever going back, but there was a problem. She had fallen for someone. He was the son of a woman who ran the compound in Mexico, and his mother despised her. But Serena had a plan. She would go back to Mexico, pick him up, and they could both run away just as soon as they turned 18. But with no money, no record of schooling, no home, no friends, no experience of living in the normal world, it all felt impossible. So she did as she was told, and she took care of those kids, the reports being so positive that she was invited to go back to Mexico. She was playing their game, scamming them, pretending to be a good witness. She later said in an interview, "I had learned from the best. I basically scammed my way through the cult for the rest of the time using their own tactics." No sooner than she arrived in Mexico, she was as devout could be. She joined the singing team. She went out into the streets and begged daily, bringing home rotten vegetables from the market. Men would be brought to the camp to view her as a prospective wife. For the first time, she was a star. No longer a rotten apple of Satan, but it was all an act. Had she gone the other way, she might have ended up in a punishment camp for what the cult called determined teens. She would have been treated to what David had once described as lashes of love. She could have been sent to the Victor Teen Program, a brutal punishment camp designed for rebellious youth. At the camp, silence was enforced for most of the day. The teens endured regular beatings, grueling hard labor up to 7 days a week, and frequent fasting. All forms of entertainment were banned. At night, they were locked in their rooms and sometimes tied to their beds. If they didn't smile during the day, elastic bands called smile machines were strapped to their heads to give the impression that they were smiling. In the teen special magazines the kids were forced to read, they would see testimonies about how such programs made them into better people and how terrible their lives had been when they were part of the system. Serena was now a hot property, a top witness. Of course, the first thing that they did was send the new Serena out to do some flirty fishing. She was good at it, and she exploited this, gaining freedom to go out to fairs and movies on the weekends and in the evenings. She met local Mexicans and tourists, befriending them, all the time wondering, where is Satan? In her mind, she still partly believed the outside world was full of demons. Just before she turned 18, the cult was in chaos. Ricky was making headlines, telling the world about his experiences as the cult's most obscene example of child rearing. Also, Serena's own sister had come out and condemned the cult for all the terrible things that had happened to her. The camp's response was that these young people had been possessed by demons. In the evening, Serena and the Mexican family would pray that God smite those youngsters with a bolt of lightning, but all she was thinking about was escaping. The family didn't know it, but Ricky had been communicating with her, convincing her to get out, telling her how absolutely wrong their lives had been. For travel funds, Serena and her secret lover begged on the streets of Mexico and were able to save enough, $120 of bus fare money. They arrived in Houston, Texas, without a penny to their name. Still pretending to follow the cult's teachings, they were taken in by a member who housed women from Mexico being trained in massage for illegal work. Things didn't work out with Serena's boyfriend, but she quickly became a skilled masseuse. With the money she earned, she bought a car and ran, eventually moving in with a friend and beginning to build a life of her own. For the first time in her life, she was free. But freedom for a girl who had never known the real world wasn't at first easy. Sure, she had fun, but she didn't know when to stop. She drank, she spent nights snorting cocaine, taking Molly and GHB. She became so good at flirting in the cult that all men fell at her knees. They queued up for her, and when she got jobs in bars and restaurants, she made great money in tips. It felt like being born again. But as much as she enjoyed her freedom, she was still a part of her programming, using the skills she had learned in that old life to take advantage of men. But in a way, her skills also served her well. She'd spent her entire life being groped by older men, begging on dangerous streets, that she'd understood danger and she knew how to avoid harm, as long as the drugs and alcohol didn't kill her. It was during this partying stage of her life that she got a call from Ricky. He wanted to know where her parents were. As much as she had hated what her parents had done to her, she knew Ricky had fallen apart and was planning to take his revenge. She refused to tell him. She had seen him on several occasions during those early days of her release from the cult. He seemed okay, but the last time in 2002, 2 years before he made that call, something had snapped. She hadn't come out publicly and told her story yet, but the family was always in the news. In the 1980s, they made a TV show and a pop song about a woman implanted with a 666 microchip. In the 1990s, they were headline news when the actor River Phoenix overdosed and died. 2 years earlier, in 1991, he had told a magazine The Family, which his brothers and sisters had been a part of, was ruining people's lives and was disgusting. The magazine Esquire referenced flirty fishing as hookers for Jesus. In 2005, Ricky made the headlines when he invited one of those nannies to his house where he stabbed her to death. As she lay dying, she still didn't know what she had done wrong. Famously, he'd made a video which explained his actions as he ominously loaded bullets into a handgun. In the video, he swore he would take down the cult one by one, but after he killed the nanny, he made a phone call and admitted what he had done. He was later found dead in his car. The family weren't exactly new to the American public, but the problem was Serena's face was often in the photographs of the exposés. Her own sister was on Larry King, talking about how she had been the victim of serious sexual misconduct, and one of the perpetrators had been David Berg. It wasn't easy for Serena to keep a low profile. She lied to everyone she met, telling boyfriends and friends her parents worked for the Red Cross. She would insist that she had lived a normal life and was half Brazilian, which is why she'd been away for so long. "Nothing of my life was true," she later said. She'd wait at least 6 months to tell her boyfriend just shards of the truth. But even then, she couldn't talk about reality without breaking down, and suffice it to say, she had trust problems where it came to men. It took years for her to come forward. Therapy didn't work, but trauma recovery did, as did her experience with the so-called Peruvian magic plant ayahuasca. A series of intense ceremonies literally blew her mind, but it helped her put it back together. She was fixing the unfixable. But it wasn't until 2019 that she went public with her story as one of the inner circle kids of the world's most infamous sex cult. She wrote on Instagram, "No longer will I be shamed into silence. The truth will set you free," and so she started talking. She let it all out, despite the hate she received online from former members. At the time, the cult still existed, now rebranded as the Family International. It appeared to have introduced a system of member rights and claimed to have distanced itself from its dark past. With roughly 1,400 members, the group now focused on charitable work in 80 countries, stating that it was empowering people to develop a personal relationship with God. On its website, it admitted that it had a colorful history, but its description of that history is at best black and white, and at worst completely ignored. As for Serena, she said in an interview she no longer has a relationship with her own family. She was spending her time working remotely for a gaming company, enjoying her freedom in Mexico City. In her own words, sipping coffee in the sunshine and watching the birds in the trees. In that same interview, she said, "It's incredible to think that at 18 I was here, dirty, starving, and begging on the streets for the cult." Serena Kelley has been through more than most. After everything, she now had the one thing that she'd been denied her entire life: freedom. Now you need to go watch Crazy Cult That Poisoned Tokyo, or have a look at the ugly truth about Gandhi.